I'm Andrew, and welcome back to Community Design Review, where we go over some of the best designs from the custom magic community. Our first meme card for the week is Sir Mix-a-Lot. He's a 2/2 legendary creature, human knight for 1 white. Sir Mix-a-Lot gets +1/+1 for each creature you control with toughness 4 or greater. Isn't Sir Mix-a-Lot a musical artist? Oh, right, he does Baby Got Back, hence the flavor text. Okay, I get it. So in Magic, butt is slang for a creature's toughness. So Sir Mix-a-Lot likes big butts. I know this is a meme, but it's actually a pretty solid design. White is the color that cares most about toughness, so I could see it having a creature like this that starts out with a decent base rate and gets bigger as you play bigger creatures. Our second meme card for the week is J'accuse. It costs white, blue, red for an instant with split second. Say it was the and name a creature card. Say in the and name a land card. Say with the and name an artifact card, an instant card, or a sorcery card. Each player reveals their hand. Each player with all 3 named cards in their hand loses the game. Okay, so this is clearly Clue, which is great. That's one of my favorite board games. It has split second. People can't respond to your accusation, which makes sense. In Clue, once somebody accuses, you just sort of have to wait with bated breath and hope they're wrong. Like, this is a high bar to clear. Your opponent has to have a specific creature card, land card. Well, not specific. You just need to know what it is. So your opponent needs to have a creature card, a land, and an artifact, instant, or sorcery in their hand. Although, to be fair, you could just play like a telepathy turn 1 and then play this turn 3. You just kill them. So I could actually see this being pretty strong. And our third meme card for the week is Debater of Technicalities. It is a 2/3 creature human advisor for white-blue. If you would draw a card, put the top card of your library into your hand instead. Oh, and then the rules text tells you what it's for. As per rule 104.3c, a player loses if they would draw cards from an empty library. However, my client was merely placing the contents of their library into their hand, not actually drawing them. Thus, Court Records of Azorius Senate, Trial of Jace Beleren. Okay, now, Jace Beleren does draw cards. He draws so many cards. But this is a very funny design. Obviously, it's useful, as they've pointed out, if you have milled out. You won't lose the game. I'm struggling to find other places that it would be relevant. That said, this is a 2/3 for 2, which is like a fine rate. Our shoutout for this week is Thunderous Smite. Costs 6 red-white for an instant, and it has Prophecy, 3 red-white, and opponent has exactly 10 life. When this card's prophecy becomes fulfilled, you may cast it for its prophecy cost instead this turn. Lifelink and Thunderous Smite deals 10 damage to target player. Interesting. Okay, so let's ignore the prophecy for now. It's 8 mana to play an instant that does 10 damage to a player and you gain 10 life, which is obviously very expensive. Despite being very powerful, probably wouldn't be a highly played spell. But having the ability to cast it for 5 makes it much more reasonable for like aggro decks to get in, try and get their opponent to exactly 10, and then play a Thunderous Smite on turn 5. Prophecy is an interesting mechanic. It lasts until the end of the turn, so if the condition, becomes unfulfilled later on in the turn, you can still play it, which I don't know if that's necessary, depending on the card, because like this is an instant, so you can just play it at the moment that the prophecy is fulfilled. But if the prophecy then stops being fulfilled in response, like that's not going to change anything. You've still cast it for 5 mana. So it doesn't really matter in the case of Thunderous Smite, but it might for other cards. And on to our top 5. We have Loyalty to the Throne. It's 1 blue for enchantment aura. Enchant creature. The monarch controls enchanted creature. Wow, that is beautiful. That's so simple and elegant. So obviously the goal is you become the monarch and stay the monarch, and then you can control the creature, and this is then just a cheaper mind control. But if anyone ever takes the monarch away from you, you lose the creature. A lot of cards that care about the monarch make you become the monarch when they enter the battlefield. This does not, so you need another way to do it, which is fine. I don't think that every card needs to be both enabler and payoff. This is very sweet. I love it. There's not much else to say. Okay, number 4 is Supernatural Sleuth. It is 1 white for creature human scout. It's a 2/2 with whenever a player casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, investigate. So this looks like Harry Dresden from the Dresden Files, which is a very good book series, and I recommend it. I love Investigate. I love Innistrad. And Dresden feels perfectly at home there. And the idea is players generally cast spells from their hand, so that's the natural. So if you cast a spell from anywhere else, that's the supernatural, and he's going to investigate it. And that's really cool. Particularly, obviously, this is going to work mostly from the graveyard, stuff that has flashback. Notably, it works when any player casts spells from anywhere other than their hand, so you can be playing your own, flashback spells or whatever in order to trigger him. So this seems like a pretty cool build around. I would like to, try this out. Maybe in an Innistrad cube. Coming in at number 3, Entertain the Idea, which is blue-red for a sorcery. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. If you don't play any of the cards exiled this way, draw a card. Interesting. So it's Impulse Draw, which is red, but for each card that you don't play, you get to draw a card, which is blue. But you gotta wait a turn for it. It always feels bad when you're playing Impulse Draw and you just don't have the time to play the card that you exile. So this fixes that. If you don't have the time to play it, you just draw a new card instead. And then that goes perfectly with the flavor of entertaining the idea. You're thinking about playing the spell, but you decide, nah, discard it. I'll do something else. Let's talk power level. It's gonna draw you 2 cards effectively for 2 mana, which generally costs 3 mana to do, but it is 2 color, which makes it better, and it's delayed. Although, there's the upside that you actually can see up to 4 cards out of it. I think this is a perfectly acceptable power level. It's a very cool design. And at number 2, we have Wait Your Turn. It costs 1 and a white for an instant counter target spell if it's your turn. Interesting. So it's a white counter spell. It only works if it's your turn. Okay, so I think this is actually a really solid design. I am somebody who thinks that counter spells should be in 2 colors, blue and probably white, and then blue can have the hard counter spells and white can have the more conditional counter spells. Now the reason that counter spells are only in 1 color is much like discard is only in black. They're both kept in just 1 color because people don't like them. It's not fun to play against them. But counter spells are actually a really fundamental part of the game. It's a way to stop big broken spells that you don't have other answers for, and I think it's really important that it is more accessible. So I think that white should get more counter spells, and this seems like a very good condition for it. You can only cast it. I mean, you could cast it on the opponent's turn, but it won't do anything. It only counters a spell if it's your turn. So as far as power level, let's see, it's 2 mana to counter any spell, but only on your turn. Basically, let's think about what this can counter. It can counter instants, and it can counter permanents with flash, and that's it. It cannot counter creatures, planeswalkers, enchantments, artifacts, unless they're somehow being cast during your turn. So this is actually very narrow. So I think 2 mana is a fine rate for it. And our number 1 for the week is Nutty Knight. It costs 1 green-white for a 3/3 creature human knight. When Nutty Knight enters the battlefield, it fights target artifact. Now look, your grace, said Sancho. What you see over there aren't giants, but windmills. And what seems to be arms are just their sails that go around in the wind and turn the millstone. Obviously, replied Don Quixote, you don't know much about adventures. So this is Don Quixote, which is a story about a man who wants to become a medieval knight long after the medieval era. So he gets together his old horse, and that becomes his war horse. And he takes his neighbor and makes him a squire. He sees some windmills, and he thinks they're giants, and he tries to do battle with them. The design of this card reminds me of a card we had a few weeks ago, Jumpy Adventurer. This fights an artifact when it enters the battlefield as opposed to when the artifact enters. So yeah, the design is interesting. When it enters the battlefield, you can have it fight an artifact. Obviously, if that artifact is not a creature, it's not going to do anything because the artifact won't have power or toughness. Although, if it is a giant, then its stats are probably too big for a Nutty Knight to do very much. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out the Custom Magic subreddit. We'll be back next Tuesday.